Time to make new friends. Fill your Glenfiddich. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton. Luncha!
Good evening, whiskey brothers, whiskey sisters, whiskey friends, and welcome to episode 25 of the Canadian Whisky Journey's Whiskey Review. I'm Dolph. I'll be your host tonight, and I'm usually joined, as you know, by Blair Phillips, the co-author of this book right here, Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries, but he's on vacation. He's having some fun. He's doing other things. But we have the great honor tonight of being joined by whiskey ambassador and entrepreneur, Beth Havers. And we're continuing our Canadian Whisky Journey tonight with this one right here, Glenfiddich's Winter Storm. But you might be thinking, Glenfiddich, Canadian whiskey, how does this work? They are incompatible, Dolph. And you would usually be right. But this is a very special Canadian Whisky Journey broadcast. And it's one that will bridge this gap really nicely, I think. And it's in big part because of this lovely person right here beside me, Beth Havers. So welcome, Beth. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. And it's really fun. Always this time of year, people start thinking of winter, and this whiskey is always a lovely whiskey to celebrate winter with. So excited to be talking about Winter Storm.
Excellent. I'm glad. It's a beautiful bottle and it's a beautiful story. So I'm going to ask you, let's just pop right into it. I'm going to ask you about your previous role with Glenfiddich and enlighten everyone as to the essential Canadian link to Winter Storm, please.
Well, yes, I was with Glenfiddich for a really long time. I started with them in 2011, 2012, and I spent up until last year as the ambassador for Canada with that brand, and many trips over to Scotland and many meetings with their malt master, Brian Kinsman, and chatting about all things whiskey. So upon one of our first meetings, I was chatting with him about whiskey and talking about all the experiments that Glenfiddich was doing at the time. And I had asked him if he had ever done anything with ice wine, because I, as a Canadian, love ice wine. And Brian actually wasn't all that familiar as a Scotsman with ice wine. So he's like, what's ice wine? I have no idea. So I told him all about it, and he's like, that sounds really interesting. And the conversation kind of stopped then. And a few years later, we had tried a whiskey as a group of ambassadors together that he had just aged in a Sauterne cask.
Okay.
And the Sauterne cask actually turned the whiskey pink. So we're like, that's really cool. And I'm like, Brian, really, Sauterne cask ice wine, you have to try it. So he's like, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. So the next year, when they were talking about releasing the experimental series, he's like, I want to try the ice wine cask. He's like, how are you going to go about getting the ice wine cask? I'm like, okay, I had the idea. I didn't actually think you were going to ask me to source the casks. So I went and called every winery in Niagara to see if I could find ice wine casks.
Okay.
That was definitely a challenge, but it came upon Peller Estates and Trius, and worked with their winemaker, Craig McDonald. He was willing to lend us 2 casks initially, and Brian started experimenting, and from there it kind of just took off.
Well, I'm sure you got way more than 2 casks, because he experimented with a whole bunch of ages, right? And then decided he needed 21 because he needed a higher tannic count, I guess, to do it, right?
So yeah, they tried with a couple of different age, older ages, and felt that the 21 was the right year to go with. So the whiskey initially was aged for 21 years in all American oak, and then we transferred it into the ice wine casks for about 6 months of finishing, and then that just lightly enveloped that kiss of Canadian ice wine onto the whiskey. And it's beautiful. I think the finish just adds that real uniqueness to it. And they released it as a limited edition in 2 batches. So the first batch came out in 2017, and that hit and went right out the window. About the second it hit the shelves. And then the same thing happened kind of with the second batch as well.
Well, there's some of the second batch floating around, and you'll see them out there well, they're always behind glass, but sometimes it's hidden and you can't see them. I bought another one because we had a tasting recently, so I'd bought one 2.5 years ago, something like that, and it came out in the tasting finally. And then I found one this weekend.
Nice.
Right after doing this, so to replace it, because I used my own for our tasting, but I needed it. But well, I've got some pictures here. And why we're doing this, we should really say that what we're saying right now is that without you and Canadian ice wine, this would have never happened. So it is ultimately Canadian. So it is very Canadian. And there it is. That's the one.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't that pretty? Well, my wife did that picture. That's good. She did that one too. Anyway, so let's go down to this, because there's the experimental series. Mm-hmm. And this was always thought of in the experimental series. Did Brian think ahead of time with all four?
No. The experimental series, how that started was initially with the IPA. So IPA was the first expression, and 2015 as well. Kind of at the same time, Project 20 came to fruition. That all happened during a brand ambassador conference in Dufton when we all selected our casks.
That there. And
that's Project 20 there.
You are the only person that took a cask, and you went to this and you were involved in that. You're the only person that chose a cask that was non-bourbon or second bourbon. Or first.
So there's 17 ex-bourbon, 2 sherry, and 1 port. So I was the only port cask.
Okay, got it. And
the unicorn port cask. So that one happened 2015, and around the same time, that was when we were talking about Winter Storm, and kind of getting the elements together to make that happen. But it took a full 2 years to make Winter Storm, bring Winter Storm to fruition, because between getting the cask, Brian came to Niagara twice to work with Craig McDonald, the winemaker at Peller Estates, to make all of this happen. So yeah, it was quite the process. And then Fire and Cane, which was the last installment from the experimental series, that happened, I think just after, so basically 2016, I think that was the ideation started happening, and the release came slightly after that.
So if I get my timing right, so let's do this picture, because this is when you went there to do Project 20. And there you are, dead center, right in the middle. Big smiling face. It's perfect. I love it. And that's when the idea came across again, or you talked about it for the second time?
Yeah. It was right and around then. We had meetings in Scotland and meetings in New York. And between those 2 meetings, we were talking about Winter Storm and trying to find somebody who would give us enough casks to make it happen, because that was the whole thing with ice wine. What I didn't realize was the amount of oak age ice wine isn't really a thing. Peller Estates is the largest distillery that makes ice wine, and they are only using about 80 casks to age ice wine per year. And they reuse them. So it's not like they have an infinite amount of ice wine casks that they can give us, or that they could give Glenfiddich at the time. So,
and they're French oak as well, right? They're French oak
yes.
And do you know if it's charred or lightly charred, or if
it's like a toasted oak. Yeah. So slightly different treatment than say a bourbon barrel would be. So yeah, it was a tricky and lengthy process to get them, and but it all worked out. And Peller Estates was just so gracious and a wonderful winery to work with. I can't say enough great things about them. And Craig McDonald, he was just a gem. And I know that him and Brian have continued to have a relationship since then. But yeah, it was just a magical experience from start to finish, and just even being given the opportunity from Brian to have an idea and bring it to fruition was just such a lovely thing for him to do. It was just great to work with him on it.
Now you're being very humble and it's very nice, but I think your name should have been on this box somewhere. They do the explanation. It's beautiful box, by the way. So they did a great job with the presentation. They really did. But in the storyline in the front or the back, I think your name should have appeared. At least one. The conception of Beth Havers from Canada. Like, how hard is that? It's 4 words. We could have done that. You could have been there, and I think they should have done that. So if they ever come up with this, because I know they're possibly continuing the experimental series, possibly, maybe. And if they do, and they have a 3rd edition, I think
I should probably I put my name on. No, I know that it was in a lot of the press. Mentioned that it was the ideation came from Canada and everything, so that was good enough. Brian ultimately did make the whiskey, so it's all him.
Well, he needs some kudos, I know, but he can share the kudos a little bit.
He's an amazing man.
It's
so
okay, it's good. And so, you know what? You're humble. You're happy. You're doing very well, and this also leads me to, and we have to taste this whiskey, but I want to put this up because this was great. I just saw this fairly recently in Whiskey Muse. So this is well, you were in Whiskey Muse, and I think you were the Muse of the month for what month was it? Was it June or this summer?
Actually, I think that was REECE's first Muse of the month last year.
Okay.
When she came up with that concept, which was just so kind of her to feature me as her Muse of the month. But REECE is just such a force in the whiskey community. So thankful of her to have done that for me. But yeah, it was a nice little interview with her. I think it was last year.
And I also have the link to it below. So if people are looking on YouTube, you can see the link below and you can click to the article. And that'll give you the personal information what Beth was doing. And that's a picture right there of REECE Sims. And she is a force. And she's all over the place. And is it Vancouver or Victoria? I think it's Vancouver.
She's based in Vancouver, yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. It's good pictures too. It's a good article. People should read it. And see humble Beth Havers in there and smiling away. Let's talk about the whiskey. So
yes. Now I'm assuming you did do a tasting of this whiskey with the lovely Jamie Johnson, who took you through the full flight of the experimental series. So you're familiar with it, and now you've bought a couple of bottles. So as I mentioned, it is 21 years in American oak, and then finished in the ice wine casks. So.
For up to 6 months. I know. I hate seeing up to, because it could be a day, which is up to 6 months. It could be, but I'm guessing it's close to 6 months. And
I will say with the finishing period for this, it was definitely the full 6 months of finishing. And that just like nicely envelops those ice wine. Like for me, this is a lot of stone fruit. The sweetness is very apparent. It's much different than any whiskey I've ever had.
I find malty sweet as well. And people talk about the ice wine sweet, but I find malty sweetness in here. I think I was thinking malty sweet before ice wine sweetness when I first had it, because I think I was looking for that sweet wine, and we love our ice wines in this house. We love it, but that didn't come through first. It was the maltiness for me, which surprised me.
Interesting. Yeah. And then on the the palate itself, I find that that sweetness that is there, but it's definitely not as apparent as it is on the nose.
Yeah. No, I'll agree. And it's a bit tannic as well. The sides of the tongue get a little bit dry, which I love. And so what else on the nose? Because people talk about lychee, and I can't smell lychee, but I can get tropical fruits or different fruits in there, but not lychee. Do you have any other thoughts for that?
I get more of a pineapple. Like lychee is not something that I often smell. So it's not something.
I know the taste, but the aroma with it, you know what? No. Maybe if we had them fresh on a continual basis, maybe. But this is Canada, and we get our fruit always shipped from somewhere.
I get more of a melony kind of note.
And I could go with melon, and I could go with, what's the orange melon? The cantaloupe. I can go with
I get that. And but like with this, like oftentimes like with a 21-year-old, like I would get more like drier fruits and that sort of, like I don't get any of that. Like this is much more like of a stony kind of fruit, like a peach, apricot, those kinds of fruits. I find is very apparent in this. But it's just a really, really beautiful whiskey.
It is.
And I know that you have you have your frozen grape, which was always the kind of suggested serve with it.
Yeah, it's right there on the bottle. Was that your idea?
No, no, that wasn't not anything apart from the idea. That's all the innovation team that came up with that. But a really kind of fun thing.
Anyways. They'll know that I did this interviewing you, and I'll just give you credit for it. And then for the 100 people that get to see this, that's what it'll be your thing.
It was kind of fun, like during the launch and everything, there was a lot of dry ice everywhere. So like a lot of like dipping of the grapes into dry ice, and like, who doesn't like dry ice?
That would be fun, especially around Halloween. Very experimental and
a lot of theater. Some other fun fact. So on the box too. So the box, this little imagery, that's a hyper zoomed ice wine vine.
Ooh, really? Yeah. That's great. I love that.
So that's very like just fun, right? So that a photographer by the name of Rick O'Brien took a bunch of pictures at Peller Estates, and then they took one of those pictures, hyper zoomed the ice wine vine, and put it all over the box.
Okay, that's really cool. You're a fountain of knowledge.
When it comes to this product, absolutely.
Good. And you got your bottle that you have. You were given one of the very first bottles into Canada, or was it the first?
Yeah, no, this is like, even like I have the UK stamp on my bottle, so this came right from the UK. This was when they first were releasing it. They sent me like kind of a preview, and this is what arrived in my mail. So yeah, when they first brought it out, like I was obviously in tears with how beautiful it was. They just did such a wonderful job with all of it.
And you were telling me why it's ceramic, because some people think like it's painted glass, but it's not. It's ceramic. You can see on the back, and you can kind of hear it. Why is it ceramic?
So they wanted something that was going to be cold to the touch. So like to just bring in that whole winter vibe. So because ceramic, when you touch it, it's cold. They really didn't miss a beat when it comes to this like the whole aesthetic and everything of this product. It was just beautiful from start to finish. So yeah, they wanted a cold bottle, so they
spent a lot of time on it. They did some time and effort, and I'm glad you had your hand in there. And
in true Glenfiddich fashion, they don't ever really skip a beat.
Yeah. Good. Jordy's got a question for you, and we had the same question, and I asked her before, but I didn't go into details just so we could do it right now, Jordy. So the difference between batch 1 and 2.
Friend, and I miss him very much. So hello. So the difference between batch 1 and batch 2, and we were just having this discussion pre this call. So basically, because batch 1, because we could only get a limited amount of casks, because they only gave us a certain amount, they had to kind of do it in batches. So batch 1 was the first batch of casks that they gave us, and then batch 2 was the second kind of run at the at the casks. So it's there's no difference. The taste and everything is exactly the same, but when it comes to collectability and everything, something with batch 1 will always have a higher collectability value and all of that, but taste profile wise and everything, they're exactly the same.
And what you said about the casks, or the availability of the casks and what they got, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And also just to mention batch one doesn't say batch one on the bottle. It says nothing. But if it's batch two, it does say batch two on the bottle.
Yeah, right in the small little part, right in red.
Yeah.
Batch two. So right there, it would have been blank for the original one.
Exactly.
Okay. And in Alberta, we're not getting any of those. In Ontario, a couple cases went back there, but flew off the shelves, like you said, right?
Yeah, Alberta, it went into. I think the Cloud9 liquor store may still have, maybe, might still have some. I don't know, but yeah, and I mean, BC got batch one during their release, their spirits release.
Okay.
In a few years back, but yeah, they went quick. How many bottles in each batch? To be honest, I can't remember.
I think it was 8,000 for batch two, but I don't know if that would have been all of them, including.
Yeah, that sounds close to that. Yeah, I mean,
say I'm right. It's good.
Yeah, I know that there were under 20,000 bottles of it made in total.
Okay. Excellent.
So one of the rarer Glenfiddichs, that's for sure.
I was going to ask two questions. One about the glass. Did you ever freeze the glass? I don't like suggestions of freezing glasses because I find it takes away from the whiskey or the flavor. Does it help? Did you freeze the glass and put the grape in? I figured the grape was enough just being cold. I didn't want to push it with the frozen glass.
How do you drink it? Yeah.
So are you a completely straight for you without the grape?
I've just had it neat. And I've also had it in cocktails too. When we were releasing the experimental series, just as a whole, we went from coast to coast with Bar Chef, which is a bar here in Toronto. Okay. They did a series of events. Gordy was actually at the one in BC. We had one in Alberta. We had one in Toronto and one in Montreal, and they created cocktails with all of the experimental expressions, including one with Winter Storm, which was there was a lot of dry ice involved again, and rosemary and iced wine. It was a crazy cocktail that they made, but to have a whiskey like this in a crazy cocktail was definitely an experience. But
I'm wondering, the cocktail didn't take over the whiskey then? The whiskey still shone through the
absolutely cocktail. It was beautiful, and like the presentation was just over the top. It was gorgeous.
Nice. Second question: do they really pick the grapes at midnight?
They sure do.
At the full moon, midnight. And, I understand at night because it still has to be cold, but I just thought it was a little bit too romantic thinking it was full moon, midnight, and then everyone has to go out at the last minute, get out there and pick the grapes before. So yeah,
I did a wine tasting. I hosted a wine tasting the other day for a group, and we did an ice wine. We did Pillar Estates ice wine actually, and we were just talking about the whole process and the romantic idea behind ice wine, because it has to be -8, I believe, for 5 consecutive days, because they have to be like super frozen, and then they go out at night, hand harvest a lot of them, and pick these berries or the grapes, and because they're frozen, you're extracting so little juice from them, which is why it's so expensive and so rare. But it's quite a beautiful, magical picking process.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to do it one day.
Yeah, right?
It's a bucket list. At midnight going into it.
Bundle up.
It feels like a teenage kind of dare thing. I dare you to go out there at midnight. See if the farmer gets you or something. I'm thinking
I'll
Halloween.
go with you.
Excellent. Okay, we're safe. We're safe. No one would dare touch you. You're too happy. That's Beth. I know. Leave her alone. She's just doing a tasting in midnight. I don't know.
We'll just crack out some whiskey, and we'll just make a whole experience out of it.
You can make that into a big tasting. It could be massive. It could be just heavenly. Heavenly, moonly. Anyway, it'd be good. Let's go to the finish. We didn't talk about the finish. So the nose, the palate. The palate it has changed a little bit for me as I've been just small sips over the past 20 minutes now. So it is changing a little bit. But let's talk about the finish if we can, because I'm finding it not really changing for me. It's kind of medium short, and it doesn't really progress. And usually a 21-year-old would kind of change somewhat for me. How about you?
Yeah, I find that it's for me it's like, well, I just took a sip now. The finish, like I still find it's there. It's so funny. I haven't actually had this whiskey because it is an occasion whiskey for me. I haven't had it in a while. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to. But yeah, it's interesting to try it again because the finish. I haven't.
You have a lot left in your bottle. Did it oxidize a bit?
No, it actually hasn't. I do have a lot left in this bottle.
Okay.
But yeah, it is kind of like a medium. I would say it's medium finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't have a progression in flavor. Do you?
No.
Nothing. Okay. I wouldn't say nothing. There's a sweetness to it, but a sweetness that doesn't develop into something else that I was thinking it might. Kind of hoping it would.
Yeah, it's not a terribly long, like complex finisher. Like, but it's a really it's quite lovely. Yeah. Yes. Again, the alcohol too, like just the kind of nicely dissipates. I do need to drink more of this.
I think so. I think you should continually drink it. Yes, you need to save some for
I heard too from an old colleague actually in Saskatchewan that there are a few bottles in Saskatchewan as well. He's just like, I've just come across a few bottles. I'm like, wow.
Then buy them. It's what
I know, right?
Yeah.
Now, when it came out in Ontario, I think it was $350 in Ontario. For us in Alberta, for the second edition, it was hovering around $300 is where it was. And my last one, I did buy at $300, so I was pretty happy.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So and I used my discount, but it was only 10%, so it is good. And but there are some out there. So some people, and that's why this is great. I think some people should actually, if they do see it, you're going to see it behind glass. It's going to be locked, but I think it's forgotten, really. I think if it's back there, the price tag that was on it could have been higher, and
they didn't change
it over those years and just forgotten in the corner.
This is the wonderful thing about Alberta. I found so many gems in Alberta over the years, just like in like Airdrie or wherever, you're just like driving through and you're like, they just don't know what they have. The liquor store just.
Well, it's true. And you stop somewhere, and this was a very nondescript store, and I bought 6 bottles of things that just hadn't been on the market for a long time, but you wouldn't think of it because of it. So Gordy says to be quiet and leave Alberta alone. So that, we'll get all of it. Let us pick it clean, and then afterwards we can. But
that's the cocktail.
So was this the one that you had?
Yeah.
Ontario Absinthe, Thyme Spirit, Balsam Fir Bitters. Wow, that's impressive, and I could never do it. I'm afraid I'm not a cocktail person, Beth. I've just started a year and a half ago, and really it can't have more than 2 steps. It really.
This had about 45
3 or 4 things in it, but 2 steps, that's it. So, but. No, thank you, Gordon. It's perfect when we can do that. But I do agree with them and leave Alberta alone. Nothing here, nothing in this province. But if you do find this, I do suggest you get it. It's worth the $300, and that's hard for me to say because I don't like spending $300, $400, $500 on a bottle. But there's some that I think are special. And I think this one was special, and I'm happy that I got it. Obviously, because I bought another one, right? And very happy to talk to you.
I'm happy you got it too.
And And the nose is changing just a little bit for me now too. So,
and that's what I do find with this as well, is it does develop in the glass. It will change. It will continue to you leave it sit for a bit.
And I think the grape probably did that. It kept it cold, and then the hand warms it up, and then the alcohol comes up, and we can smell it over time.
Do you typically drink your whiskeys cold, or are you just a neat? No.
Neat. And maybe 2 or 3 drops. And if I do SMWSs up there, I will put water in it. I love my cask strength. My favorite's cask strength, single cask, but it's always first. And then a little bit of water later. Something like this at 43%, I wouldn't usually put water, but I did at the end of our tasting, and I did enjoy it. So a 43% with water changing for me I know it's supposed to change a small amount, but I don't usually notice it as much with the lower percentages. A 40 or 43% with water doesn't change drastically for me, whereas a cask strength SMWS will change drastically. And this one did change at 43, which was one of the other reasons why I was happy to get it up. So
it's a 43% is a very common, it's a common bottling strength for Glenfiddich, which is and actually a lot of Scotch whiskeys for 43% is but I always find it interesting. But I do like a little bit of water does kind of help this just open it up a little bit more. Typically, at the distillery and stuff, when you're tasting samples, they can dilute it right down to like 30, 35. So it's always interesting to play with water and see what it does to your whiskey.
Me too. The new make, which comes off, and even more, like 20, and just lower, trying to get the flavors off something that's that hot and that fresh is kind of
cool. Oh, goodness. Yes, for sure.
But Beth, I'm going to wrap it up, but I'm going to ask for last comments from you, and then that'll be it. It's been a fantastic night. So I need to say thank you to you. And I'm going to tell everybody that everything was your idea anyways, even though you've been humbly saying that it hasn't been. I'm still going to say that. But last comments to you, Beth.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak about this wonderful experience. I'm so fortunate to have been involved in this. Still fortunate to be working in the whiskey world, just in a different facet now. Now I make whiskey cookies and host my own whiskey tastings, which has been a lot of fun. But I always like talking about Glenfiddich and this wonderful experience. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Our pleasure. Thank you. And Gordy and so many other people reached out to me like just recently. They're so happy that you're coming on. So this was great. So I'm really happy you came. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Let's just say cheers, and hopefully you get to come on again one day. And we still have to keep the Canadian link up there somehow. I'll make one up if I have to, but we'll do that.
Absolutely. Cheers to you. And I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. I'm like, what day is it? Tuesday.
Rest of the week. It'll be fantastic. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.